If there was an anime that I found myself thoroughly enjoying and loving to this day, even though I know that the premise isn't anything groundbreaking or special, and it has a very sketchy history behind it, especially with how it's dubbed, then ghost stories, or originally known as Gakko no Kaidan, would be the answer. Funny story of how I got introduced to this anime. Well, just like my experience with Detective School Q, I got introduced to this anime on Animax. And this was before ADV Films had their hands on ghost stories, or what was known on Animax as Ghosts at School, or known in its original Japanese title as Gakko no Kaidan. I remember catching the Animax dub, and yes, it was enjoyable because it was airing during the time I was at the age of most of the characters in the show, especially considering that Momoko was the eldest at 12, and the rest of the characters, namely Hajime, Reo, and Satsuki, were between 10 or 11 years old, and Keiichiro was the youngest at being 7 years old. So I did find myself enjoying a lot of the episodes and found myself rooting for the characters. Even though these days as an adult, I can't really find anything extremely special or unique about them, but they're still lovable characters in their own special ways, and the basic premise of ghost stories or Gakko no Kaidan still involves the kids capturing those ghosts and demons who haunt an old school and are about to be faced with this ongoing project that's near the school. So it's up to them to be involved in this mission, but also have an unexpected ally in the form of Amanojaku, who in turn ends up possessing Gaia, Satsuki's and Keiichiro's pet cat. So that's fine and dandy in terms of its original premise, and I could understand why there was this whole narrative of Gakko no Kaidan having kind of a cult following in Japan, but this whole narrative of it not being as successful there is probably a PR move done by ADV Films to ensure that this unique dub, let alone glorified gag dub, gets produced. And yes, Steven Foster was pretty much the mastermind of a lot of the changes in dialogue, the fourth wall breaks, the westernized pop culture references, and a lot of the jokes that could give the likes of Family Guy, South Park, and The Simpsons a run for their money, and even jokes targeted toward Cartoon Network and other voice actors like Vic Mignogna, and even Western film actors like Christian Slater. So you really have to hand it to ADV Films for producing such a fun dub of what is otherwise a G-rated horror story involving 5 kids capturing different ghosts, almost like a Scooby-Doo series combined with any mystery series that you would have grown up with when you were a child. So with Ghost Stories, which was the title known through its ADV Films dub back in 2005, I did find myself enjoying the dub, especially considering that I watched it out of sheer curiosity on YouTube after Ghosts at School had its last run on Animax somewhere in either 2005 or 2006. And around that time, the glorified gag dub by ADV Films became a lot more prominent, a lot more viral, and a lot more memorable in its own weird and unique way. I do understand that comparing Gakko no Kaidan or Ghosts at School or Ghost Stories to Detective School Q or Tante Gakkun Q would be kind of unfair, because I could understand that Ghost Stories operates on an episode by episode basis. So there's not a lot of intersecting, let alone continuous storylines, other than the kids capturing all the ghosts, and especially with the element of Satsuki's and Keiichiro's mother's diary is concerned, detailing her previous experiences with those ghosts and demons. And on top of that, one thing that really made Ghost Stories very interesting was the fact that it used traditional Japanese ghosts like Babaseri and Hanako in the toilet, Amado Jaku, of course, and even some Western ones like the ghost of Ludwig van Beethoven and the ghost of Leonardo da Vinci. That was absolutely really fun and eclectic, although when you look back at it, the package may not be anything so special or so groundbreaking. Whereas with Detective School Q, yes, the mysteries are full of tension, excitement, intrigue, drama, and there are a lot of motives that the perpetrators have, whether it's really overwrought or melodramatic or selfish or something that you can't help but kind of feel sorry for them, but there's barely any justification other than they ended up being caught, all thanks to Q's, Ryu's, Megumi's, Kintaro's, and Kazuma's teamwork, especially when it comes to completing all the clues. And there are also some storylines that have made Detective School Q a lot more worthwhile watching, but never ended up getting the American English dub that I thought it really deserved as well. Now, yes, like I said, it is unfair that Ghost Stories ended up getting the English dub from ADV Films, whereas with Detective School Q, it just ended up being stuck with the Animax English dub and didn't end up being licensed by ADV Films. But that's a whole nother discourse for a whole nother video. So right now with Ghost Stories, I can definitely say that it is both a guilty pleasure as well as a solid watch. A solid watch because whether you like it or not, it's still a really fine anime, especially for children and teenagers to watch, especially if they're into a lot of the horror stories from Japan, or if they want to watch an anime about ghosts and demons and Japanese history, a little mythology. And it's a nice introduction for Japanese folklore next to Inuyasha or Ayakashi Samurai Horror Tales, but mostly Inuyasha. And as for the English dub done by ADV Films, I found myself laughing and guffawing with glee, sometimes in a pretty twisted manner, but other times in a genuine manner. I also can't help it but think that these are supposed to be elementary school kids, and the dub makes them act as if though that they were in early high school or late middle school. Whereas with Kichiro, he goes from being a crybaby first grader to, let's just say, rather slow in the head and ends up babbling gibberish and utterly unintelligible lexemes pouring out of his mouth. So, not just Kichiro in terms of him just being slow in the head, but his older sister, Satsuki Miyashita, ends up turning from a main heroine to someone with a lot more of an angrier, bitchier, and crasser personality who is not afraid to throw F-bombs galore. I've always enjoyed Satsuki's dialogues and her quick snaps and jabs. They just made her a lot more hilarious. And the overall package that I've received from Satsuki just made her absolutely fun to witness. Hajime goes from being a sort of mischievous young boy to a more perverted middle school wannabe hotshot. And he is also a lot more irreverent in the way that he treats people. And as for Reo, he goes from being a psychic research nerd into a Jewish stereotype known as Leo, complete with just mentioning that he is Jewish, he has his customs, and he pretty much abides by certain stereotypes. And Momoko, oh my goodness, was she the most hilarious of the bunch, especially when she spouts out her fundamentalist Christian gobbledygook and just manages to make a meal out of every single one of them. She goes from this unassuming girl who is pretty much the group's big sister to pretty much giving the likes of Pat Robertson a run for his money, although with a lot more sweetness in her cadence and her way of speaking. And of course, you got Kaya, possessed by Amano Jaku, who in turn has become a lot crasser. And the characters in Ghost Stories have become a lot crasser and a lot more butch and a lot more outspoken in an unusual way, thus making this a lot more hilarious to listen to, let alone watch. And I can see why it's become quite the cult classic in the best way and the not so great way. In terms of the best way that it became a cult classic, people will always turn to the dub, which is a glorified gag dub, and you could definitely tell that everybody at ADV Films had a lot of fun just letting their voices out and just really pouring it out. You could definitely tell that they were pros from beginning to end. And whether you like Steven Foster or not, at least he managed to make something that stood out in a rather unique way. There's no doubt that Ghost Stories did boast a lot of excellent talent on both sides of the pond. I mean, in the Japanese side, you have the likes of Tomoko Kawakami as Satsuki Miyashita, Kumi Sakuma as Momoko Koigakubo, Takako Honda as Hajime Aoyama, Makoto Tsumura, who has been very well known for voicing a lot of young boys, as Reo Kakinoki, and Kurumi Mamiya, who was really well known for being the voice actress for Hamtaro, voicing Kichiro. And let's also not forget about the great Ryusei Nakao, who voiced Amano Jaku. Now, for those of you who don't know, Ryusei Nakao has been very well known for voicing Frieza from Dragon Ball Z. And he's been very well known for voicing a lot of anti-heroes and his main penchant being villains. So he definitely rocked in that role. And we dare not forget about Koto no Mitsuishi as the late Kayako Miyashita. And I dare not forget about Megumi Ogata, who also voiced Akane, one of the ghosts, thus making it a really exciting ensemble on the Japanese side. And on the English side, they kind of blew the Japanese cast out of the water in the best way possible. And whether you love the results or not, you still gotta give the English voice actors a lot of credit. I mean, I loved Hilary Haig as Satsuki Miyashita, who managed to bring that edge to her character, as well as that spunk, but also that crasser side to her a lot more effectively than I could ever give her credit for. And she definitely did such an amazing job with the role. I also have to give it to Monica Rial for really, really selling it as Momoko, especially with her fundamentalist Christian jingoisms being put to amazing use. Then Christine Otten, who may be a little bit more well known for voicing slightly mature women or older girls, but hearing her as Keiichiro was a lot of fun, and she was able to pull it off so amazingly and convincingly as part crybaby little brother, part someone who is a bit on the crass side, but lives in his own goofy little world and speaks gibberish whenever he ends up getting the chance. I mean, Chris Patton, my goodness, the man managed to steal this show so effectively and so wonderfully as Hajime Aoyama, all thanks to his charismatic delivery and the way he was able to just win me over in that particular role. Same goes for Greg Ayers as Leo, who has that trademark high-pitched sound to his voice to portray this prepubescent boy, let alone Jewish stereotypes so effectively. And I must give it to Ilyich Guardiola, who voiced Richiro, Satsuki's and Keiichiro's father, so convincingly, all thanks to the smoothness of his voice, and Marcy Banner and her more contralto voice for adding a lot of personality to Kayako Miyashita. Rob Mungle was also another show stealer as Amano Jaku, all thanks to that rough baritone voice of his. And he just managed to continue to sell it and sell it every time I listened to him deliver those wonderfully rollicking lines with such drawling sarcasm, but at the same time, that acidic tone that makes him both threatening and someone who's a bit of a trickster. So major props definitely has to go to Rob Mungle for that superb delivery. I also must give it to Tommy Drake, Kira Vincent Davies, Shelley Colleen Black, Brittany Karbowski, Lucy Christian, and and Alice Folks, and everybody who was involved in the Ghost Stories dub for making this beautiful mess in the most epic way possible, and at the same time something I can go rewatch over and over again just because of how hilarious, fun, and just plain awesome the dub is. I know that when it comes to glorified gag dubs, this is one that I could defend to my dying day, because I can hear that the voice actors did have a lot of fun taking jabs at other visual media and also kind of on each other, but I could definitely sense the charisma, the charm, the absolute brilliance in its weird, unique, and pretty messy way. And it's pretty interesting to see just how Steven Foster could turn a kids' horror anime that has actually a very solid cult following in its homeland and was also based off of children's horror stories, let alone horror novels, that chronicle all of these strange happenings occurring, into something that could give the likes of Family Guy, The Simpsons, American Dad, and South Park a run for their money. And if I had it my way, I probably would have been cool for Ghost Stories to have aired on Adult Swim. I know that with Adult Swim, there are definitely some F-bombs that have been spouted on Ghost Stories, but that would have been really fun to have had Ghost Stories air on Adult Swim. But where it was on the Anime Network, at least it found its home, and at least it managed to be a thoroughly enjoyable ride. And that's what I feel about the entirety of Ghost Stories. A thoroughly enjoyable ride. Yes, purists might not find it to be respectful to the original source material, or way too crass, way too annoying, and just way too overactive, let alone hyperactive. But I don't care. I still enjoy it for its merits in terms of its really fun dialogue and just how much the characters' personalities just grew with a sort of edge that made them stand out a lot more than their original Japanese counterparts. And I repeat, must give it to Hilary Haig, Monica Rial, Chris Patton, Greg Ayers, Christine Otten, Rob Mungle, Ilyich Guardiola, Marcy Banner, Lucy Christian, Shelley Colleen Black, Kira Vincent Davies, Tommy Drake, and all of the fine ladies and gentlemen of ADV Films. Credit where credit is due for making such a wonderful experience, let alone really fun experience with making Ghost Stories come to life. And like I said, whether you love Steven Foster or not, whether you agree with his creative decisions or not, or whether you feel like his whole spiel of Ghost Stories not doing so well in Japan feels credible to you or not, you still gotta give the man some credit for at least putting his own spin on this dub, even though purists might want to look away from it, let alone turn away from it. At least I'll still appreciate Ghost Stories for what it had to offer. It was definitely something that metamorphosized from being this G-rated horror anime series meant for children and older children to being a horror black comedy that is drawling and dripping with fourth wall breaks, jokes that can be dark, no cream, no sugar, and a dub that still leaves me smiling to this very day. And believe me, Ghost Stories English dub done by ADV Films is something that I will continue to keep coming back to, especially if I'm having a shitty or crappy day. And thank goodness that all the voice actors and voice actresses partaking in this dub made it all the more enjoyable. And if you caught Ghost Stories, whether it was on the Anime Network or whether you have the DVDs or whether you watched it online, what did you think of it? And what were your experiences with Ghost Stories? Did you really feel that this was an anime that you can tune into, especially if you have a shitty day, whether it was at school or at work or anything, and you just want to kick back and wind back and just enjoy the absolute rollicking revelry that Ghost Stories has to offer? Who was your favorite character from this anime? Did you also feel that the characters' personalities took a lot more of characteristics, even up to 11? And did you also prefer how they were characterized? Or did you feel like this was something that you do not want to check out, let alone rewatch, even if you were forced to? Please let me know in the comments below. There's no doubt that Ghost Stories still manages to put a smile on my face. And even though it's not something that is entirely unique in its premise or groundbreaking, I could forgive all of that with a drop of a hat because of just how thoroughly fun it is. Its beauty is in that glorious mess of an English dub, and I became happier for it. So, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and take care, everybody.